Alright, so now we're going to take a look at this introduction to file input and output. Essentially what we're going to be considering here are times where you need to store and access content that is contained within a file. So essentially here file is assuming text file as opposed to Java file. So Java is going to provide a set of classes and methods to manage file input and output from what is known as the I/O package. So we've seen a little bit from the util package when we deal with things like our, say like our scanner class comes from that package. But now we're going to take a look at another package, the I/O package. So there are going to be three basic steps to take whenever we're handling a file in our programs. First, we're going to open the file and establish a connection between the program and the file. So we need to make sure that we have some way of saying, okay, I want to go get this particular file so that I can go ahead and either read from it or write to it. Next, we'll go ahead and actually perform that operation. So we'll go ahead and actually read data from or write data to the file. And then finally, whenever we're done using the file, we want to make sure that we close the connection. And that last step is a bit subtle, but very important. There are a few problems that you can run into. For example, if you've ever worked on a Windows machine and you've had a file open, but you tried to delete it, you'll know that it gives you a little error message saying that it can't delete a file that's currently in use. If you forget to close your connection to a file, you have a similar sort of problem where there are going to be certain kinds of tasks or operations that you cannot perform on that file because you didn't properly close the connection. Additionally, so that comes from just having the file open, maybe if you want to read from it. If you're trying to write to the file and you fail to close the connection, you're going to see that there's another very big issue with that, and I'll demonstrate what happens there when we get to that particular point. But first, next couple of things we'll take a look at just to kind of get through the setup for file management. You're also going to need the following import to access those classes associated with file input and output. So this is how we're going to go get all of the classes that we want from our I/O package. We're going to do import java.io dot and then that little star or asterisk character. So that asterisk is going to indicate that our import statement should be treated as a wildcard import. So this means that we're going to import all classes contained inside of that package. So we're just going to go ahead and grab everything all at once instead of just grabbing a couple of classes at a time. Additionally, you should be aware of the location that files are accessed from by default. So this is going to be a really big one as well. If you're working with most IDEs, such as NetBeans, that I'm using primarily for all of these different videos, files are going to be accessed from the project directory by default. So the project directory means the top level directory of your project. That is not the same as the directory or the folder location where your Java files are stored. So it's going to be a totally different location. However, if you're using a simple text editor and just running files through a terminal, so you're not using a full-blown IDE for this, your files are going to be accessed at the same location as the class file by default. So in a moment when we actually start creating files, I'll kind of step through the project structure so we can actually see precisely where they're being placed. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is going to be the printWriter class. So first we're going to see how to actually write data to a file. The printWriter class is going to make use out of print and printline methods to write to a file, similar to writing output to the console. So essentially it's going to be just like we are writing something to that console window in our IDE. The difference here now is that it's just going to go to a separate text file. So the first thing we'll go ahead and do, we're going to specify that we want to write to a file called, in this case, testfile.txt. So we're going to make sure that we have that extension indicating that it is in fact a text file. In this case, it's going to be located within the project directory. The reason that we know it's going to be in the project directory is because that's where it puts it by default, and we have not specified a very particular file path. So it just assumes that the file path is leading straight to that project directory. So in this case, we're going to say printWriter, we'll call it output file, is going to be equal to a new printWriter object. So it's just like when we make our scanner objects. We then go ahead and put in a string literal the name of the file. So we need to specify precisely what file it is that we're going to be accessing to write something to. We'll then go ahead and print the phrase hello world to the file. So the way that we do this, we're using the printline method but keep in mind that now we're not using system.out, so this is not going to the terminal, that output console. Instead, this is going to be going to that output file that we just created. So we're going to say output file dot println, and then again we still have the same parentheses, double quotes, and then the string that we want to go ahead and actually print to it. And then finally, when we're done with this, we want to make sure that we actually close the connection to the file. So that's where that last line comes in, where we're going to take that output file and we're going to call the close method on it to close it properly. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. We'll come over to NetBeans. We'll go ahead and put together a simple example of this. So we're going to go ahead and create a new project. Go ahead and make a Java application. Click Next. For this one, we'll go ahead and do File IO. Just make the project name File IO. Click Finish. And then right here, go ahead and get rid of the extra comments. Before I get into the class itself, I'll go ahead and include that import statement right now. So we're going to do import java.io.star. So that little star character just means we're going to go ahead and grab everything from our IO package. Go ahead and adjust the style and remove a couple of the other comments. And then right here, we'll go ahead and start off by using the printWriter class. So this printWriter class is just going to be used to actually write something to the file. So we're going to say printWriter, call this output file. This will be equal to a new printWriter. And right here, we're going to go ahead and put in the name of that file. So we can call this something like testfile.txt. And complaint right now. So in a moment, we'll go ahead and take a quick look at why we're getting this error right here. Something about file not found exception. We'll deal with that in just a moment. But first, we'll go ahead and finish putting together the sample code that we have right there. So we've got output file dot println. So we have this phrase, hello world, that we want to go ahead and print to that file. And then finally, we want to go ahead and make sure that we close it. So we'll have output file dot close. Go ahead and save that. And so naturally, because we have this error that it's warning us about already, if we try to run this, the expected outcome would be that we try to run it anyway, but it will just warn us and tell us that we can't do it. Essentially what it's trying to say is that we have uncompilable source code. So not only can we not run this, we can't even compile it. So let's go ahead and step back over here and see if maybe we have a bit of an explanation as to what's going on with that, that particular error. So whenever an unexpected event or error occurs in a program, an exception is going to be thrown. So if you've been experimenting with a lot of the programs that we've done up to this point, there's a good chance that at some point you've probably made some kind of mistake or had some kind of error in your program that has caused some kind of exception to be thrown. So this is kind of just describing precisely what's happening there. So these exceptions are going to be signals that some part of the program must be corrected to resolve that exception. In this particular case, because we're dealing with file IO, it's not simply the program that might have some problem with it. There are some external factors that we have to consider, like say if that file doesn't exist, kind of like this file not found exception that it's warning us about, or maybe the file does exist but the name that we're using is not exactly correct, the file path is not exactly correct. Maybe when we're trying to read from or write to the file, there's some kind of compatibility issue there that you have to take into consideration. So there's a couple of different things that may not necessarily be the fault of the program itself, but could have something to do with the connection to the file. In this particular case, there are going to be specific types of exceptions that require adding a throws clause to the method header. So this IO exception that we're going to be taking a look at is an example of that. So for all of the programming examples that we've been looking at so far, and all of the ones that we're going to be considering for our file IO, this throws clause should be added to the header of the main method. So since the main method is the only method that we're working with, that's where we're going to go ahead and put this. So we can see right here we've got the rest of our main method's header, that public static void main, and then that string args. But then to the right of that, we've got what is known as the throws clause, which is going to say throws, and then specify the type of exception that we might throw, which in this case is going to be IO exception. So we saw when I kind of took a look at the error message that it was file not found exception. Essentially what this IO exception is going to do is that this is capable of catching any one of the different kinds of exceptions we might get from dealing with file input and output, which includes file not found. So this one's kind of like a catch-all. So we'll go ahead and add this. Come back over here. So right here on our method header, we're going to go ahead and put in throws, and then we're going to go ahead and put IO exception. Go ahead and save that. And so now we can go ahead and actually do this. So we'll go ahead and run this. And so now it's able to successfully run since it's capable of catching any exceptions that might occur. But in this particular case, there wasn't actually an exception thrown, so it was able to successfully set up the file, write to it, and then close it. So now what we can go ahead and do is from our IDE window, we can actually come over to this files right here. We'll go ahead and click on that, open this up. And right here, so file.io is the project. Like if we look right here, it's talking about the project right here. And inside of that project directory, so in that folder, we see our testfile.txt. So I'll go ahead and open that up. And inside of that file, we've got the phrase hello world written to the console, or to the window for it. So there's a couple of different things to say about the printWriter class. To start off with, we'll say the printWriter class on its own erases the contents of an already existing file, and will overwrite those contents with whatever is specified in print or printline statements. So let's take a look at this. So let's say I've got my testfile.txt, it has the phrase hello world inside of it. Let's say that I wanted to add on to that the phrase something like how's it going, and save that. So if I go ahead and run this, so now go ahead and take a look at that file again. We see now it just has the phrase how's it going. So it overwrote what was already in that file. Ideally, whenever you're trying to write something to a file, in a lot of cases, you don't really want it to overwrite the existing content. You want it to kind of add on to what's already there. So to do that, we want to go ahead and append data to a file instead. We're going to incorporate what is known as the FileWriter class alongside the PrintWriter class. So we're going to have two steps that we have to go through now. The first is setting up our FileWriter object. So we're going to say FileWriter fWriter. It's going to be equal to a new FileWriter. So again, we're still going to see that construction just like our scanner and just like what we've already been doing with the PrintWriter. For this FileWriter, this is going to take two values or two arguments. The first argument is again going to be a string with the name of the file. We have that comma separation to go to the next argument, which in this case is just going to be the value true. So it's a Boolean value for this one. And what that Boolean is going to tell us is that when it's set to true, that we want to perform appending instead of overwriting. And then when we make our PrintWriter object, so we still have our PrintWriter output file equal to a new PrintWriter, what we're going to put into it instead is going to be the fWriter that we just made. So now the PrintWriter is going to be using the fWriter, which was set to true to indicate that we're going to be appending, so that now when we use our print statements or our printline statements, it's going to just add on the new content that we're writing to it. So you can also see the description here. The second value passed into the FileWriter specifies that you want to append text rather than overwrite existing text. If you exclude the second value, so you could do this with just the string, but if you do that, then the default behavior is going to be to overwrite existing text. So if you're ever going to use the FileWriter, it is important to make sure that you specify that true value. Otherwise, it basically just behaves exactly like the PrintWriter. So let's come over here. We'll test that out as well. So let's say we change this again to say hello world first. Go ahead and add that exclamation point and save that. And then right here, we'll go ahead and modify this to make use of the FileWriter. So I'm going to say FileWriter, call it fWriter. It's going to be equal to a new FileWriter. And right here, go ahead and put in our testfile.txt. And then we have our comma. And then we're going to put true to indicate that we want to append to the file. And then right here for our PrintWriter, instead of specifying the name of the file, we're just going to use the fwriter. So we're going to use this file writer, which again right here specifies the name. So that'll be how the print writer recognizes which file we're trying to write to. And then we've got this value true right here so that it understands that we want to append new content to it. So go ahead and save this and we'll run it. And so at this point, if we come over here, so we've got our how's it going that we already had, and then underneath that, we now have the phrase hello world. So we're now appending content to it instead of overwriting the existing content. So before we move on from the file writer and print writer, there's one other thing that I should probably make a note of that you might have noticed from the very first time that I ran this program successfully, which was that I didn't say anything about actually making this file. So if I go ahead and delete this, yes. So right now, that test file, that txt, doesn't actually exist inside of my project directory. If I go ahead and run this program, we're going to try to print this content hello world to it. So you'll notice that it just went ahead and made the file for me. So an interesting thing to note about the print writer is that by default, if the file that you're trying to write to does not already exist, this class will actually go ahead and make that file for you. So in this case, it just went ahead and made this text file and went ahead and wrote that hello world to it. Another thing to make note of when we're dealing with our print writer, so let's say we want to go ahead and put the phrase how's it going next. But in this particular case, I just removed the close, so I'm not going to try to close my connection to that file. So by the time we reach the end of this program, we never closed the connection to that file before we terminated our program. So let's see what kind of effect that has when we try to write something to it. So go ahead and run this. So I don't get any errors for this, but something did go wrong. If I go ahead and open this, it didn't actually write anything to the file. So the problem that it runs into here is that whenever you try to write something to a file, before it actually performs the write operation, so before it actually puts it into the file itself, it's going to take whatever it is that you want to write to it, and it's going to store that in what is referred to as kind of a file buffer. So it's kind of like when you were dealing with the keyboard buffer, back when we had to talk about the scanner class and reading keyboard input. Essentially what happens is it's going to set aside the content that you want to write to that file, and it's going to wait until the program is done. The primary reason that it does this is because of the fact that writing to a file is a pretty slow operation compared to most of the other things that you do in a program. So it kind of likes to wait until you're done with it. So until you close the file, like this, it's going to keep it stored in that buffer. And then when you close the file, one of the things that it will do is go ahead and take what's in that buffer and then actually write it to the file. So if you don't include this line, it's going to be stuck in that buffer, and it's essentially going to be lost or just erased from it without ever writing it to the file. So if you forget to put this, you're going to know that you forgot to put this because you're not going to see anything written to the file. So I'm going to go ahead and put that line back in. We'll go ahead and run the program. And now if I go check in test file, we're going to see that it actually wrote how's it going into that file. So always make sure that you include this close at the very end. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of unexpected behaviors like that. So talking a little bit more about where the file is being written to. So as I mentioned, by default, files are going to be saved or stored in the project directory in NetBeans. So there could be some additional specifications that you could make about the file location. So if you're doing it with either Windows or maybe some other OS, say like a Mac, for example, you can see a couple of different configurations here for specifying the file path. So in Windows, they're going to do maybe something like your H drive, you then have your colon, you then have your slash, and then the name of the file. In this particular case, because a Windows file path uses backslashes, and a backslash is the escape character for your strings in Java, you cannot put just a single backslash character. Instead, you have to put two of them to indicate that it's going to be a literal backslash. If this seems a little bit messy, One of the things to note is that Java does allow you to just use forward slashes in Windows. So the second configuration that we have right here is actually acceptable in any operating system, where you can do something like maybe from a Mac, you start with your home. So you would have /home, another /, the username, and then another /, and then the name of the file. So to go ahead and give you an example of something like this, let's say I come over here to NetBeans. In my file IO, just go ahead and right click on this and go to new. Let's go to just folder right here. So go ahead and create a new folder. Let's go ahead and call this something like, let's say output in all lowercase. Go ahead and click finish. And so that's going to go ahead and make this new output folder for me. What I'm going to go ahead and do is just delete this testfile.txt. So I'll just go ahead and get rid of that. Let's go ahead and do like so. And so then right here, whenever I want to specify the file that I want to write to, I'm just going to go ahead and include a path to it. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to put it in the output folder, and then I have my / and then testfile.txt. So now what it's going to do is it's going to look for a folder called output in the project directory. It's going to see that folder right here. It's going to go inside of that folder. So right now there's nothing inside of it, but in a moment it'll go ahead and put testfile.txt inside of that folder, and then also write some content to it. And what I'm going to have to do this time is I'm going to go ahead and have it write two things to it. So we're going to go ahead and include output file.println right here. And this time I'm going to go ahead and have it say hello world for the first one, and then how's it going for the second one. So I'm going to go ahead and have it write everything that I've been showing so far into that file all at once. So we'll go ahead and run this. And so now you can see it went ahead and created testfile.txt inside of my output folder because I specified that particular path for it. If I go ahead and open this file, we can now see hello world, how's it going, all written into that file. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at writing to a file, we'll go ahead and look at reading from a file as well. So the scanner class can be used to read data from a file. So just like how we used the scanner class to read from keyboard input, we can actually use this for reading from a file as well. By creating an object of the file class, we can go ahead and pass that object into our scanner object. So right here, we see that we're first going to go ahead and create a file object called myFile. So we see right here we got file, myFile. It's going to be equal to a new file object. And then we have the double quotes, and we're going to specify the name of the file that we want to go ahead and create. Again, just like when we were dealing with our print writer, right now we're just showing the name of it, but you can put a full file path there. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate it like that to write to our test file, or to read from our test file in a moment. From there, we can go ahead and use the scanner object. We'll go ahead and call this input file. We'll go ahead and create our object of the scanner class. So we're going to say it's equal to a new scanner. And then the thing that we're going to pass in is going to be the file object that we just created. So in this case, we're going to put my file into there. We can then go ahead and read a line from the file. So in this case, we're going to do input file.next line. That'll read a line from the file. This is going to be similar to when we used next line for reading keyboard input. One of the key differences is that the program doesn't need to wait for it now because of the fact that the user's not typing something. We're just reading from a file. The program can go ahead and just immediately do this. The one thing that is similar though is that when we use next line, what that's going to do is go ahead and just return or just give us back a string for that line from the file that it just read. And then once we're done with that, we can go ahead and close the file. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So come back over to our NetBeans project. So right now we've got all of this set up. So since we're going to be using the scanner class, we need to go ahead and import that as well, since that does not come from the IO package. So we'll go ahead and get that from the util package. Go ahead and save. Right here, what I'll go ahead and do is just comment everything that I've got right now out. So go ahead and comment all that out. Since I don't really want it to continuously write more stuff to this file, I'm pretty content with just having this little bit in there. Right here, we'll go ahead and create our scanner. So we're going to call this one input file. This is going to be equal to a new scanner. And the thing that I need to put in right here is going to be the file object. So just before it, we'll go ahead and include that as well. So we're going to have a file called myFile. This is going to be equal to a new file object. And right here, I need to go ahead and specify that I want to read from this test file, that txt right here. So we'll need those double quotes. And then the thing I'm going to put in here, again, is going to be the full file path to get to it from the project directory. So that's going to be just like what I did right here. So we're going to say output / testfile.txt. So then once I can go ahead and read from that, it's going to go ahead and read the content inside of this file right here. And then we're going to go ahead and put that into our scanner so that we can actually perform that read operation. Then once I've gone ahead and done that, what I can go ahead and do is just use my input file, that next line. But this by itself, all it does is just return the string. It doesn't actually do anything with it. So if I want to actually do something useful with it, maybe like print it to the console, I need to actually go ahead and put that into a print statement. So what I can go ahead and do is just take this little bit of code that I have right here and just insert that into a print statement. So let's go ahead and just put a little space right there to kind of keep these separated, because we're going to do system.out.println right in front of it. And then we're going to go ahead and make sure that that thing is contained inside of those parentheses. And then if we are content with everything we've done with this read operation, we can go ahead and close the file. So we'll just go ahead and do the exact same thing that we did with our output file, where we just go ahead and tell it to close once we are done. So we'll go ahead and do all this, and then we'll go ahead and run it. So save that, run it, and now we can go ahead and print out the phrase hello world to the console. And so the reason that it's printing out just hello world, that's going to be the very first line inside of the file. So this next line method actually behaves quite literally as a next line method. So it's only going to read a single line from the file, meaning as soon as it sees that new line character, essentially the equivalent of pushing the enter key, then it's going to go ahead and stop there. So if I wanted to go ahead and print out the next line as well, I would just go ahead and include another one of these. So we can go ahead and do something kind of like this. This way now it will go ahead and print out both of those lines for me. So now we'll go ahead and print out hello world and then how's it going. But one thing that you'll probably notice already is that if I wanted to go ahead and read from a file that has a lot of lines of code inside of it, I would essentially have to do what I'm doing on lines 21 and 22 over and over and over again. So ideally, I would kind of like to come up with a more concise way to do this. So there might perhaps be a way to do that based on something that we just saw in this chapter. So kind of think a little bit about that. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So our lines are read from the file until the end of the file is reached. In this particular case, we can do that with a while loop. So the hasNext method can be used to check if the file still has content to read. So essentially hasNext just says if there's something still inside of the file, then we'll just go ahead and keep doing this. So in this particular example, we're seeing two different variations of this, one to read lines from the file and then one to read some numbers from the file. In either one of those cases, we're using the hasNext method to just make sure that it still has something to be read. In the first example, since we're doing next line, we're going to do that as a string. In the second example, we're doing next double, so we're going to go ahead and make sure that our data type is double, and then we can just go ahead and print that content from there. So let's go ahead and minimize this. So if we come over here, I'll go ahead and do it with just the two lines that we have already. Essentially what we want to go ahead and do is just remove at least one of these, since we only need to make use out of this other line right here. And what we need to go ahead and do is just above that, go ahead and set up that while loop that we want to use. So we're going to do the keyword while, and then we're going to go ahead and say that our input file dot hasNext, and then that pair of parentheses, and then right here, go ahead and tab this over, save that, And so in this particular case, because I'm only going to be doing this with a single line of code for my while loop, I can go ahead and just omit the curly braces. It's just going to go ahead and take this one line that I have right here and just repeat that over and over again, as long as the input file has some next value to read. So go ahead and save everything that we've got. And then if we go ahead and run this, it'll still go ahead and just print out those 2 lines. And then maybe if I come over to my test file and I add some more content to it, say it's going quite well. How are you doing? Go ahead and save that. Come back over here and we go ahead and run this. It'll go ahead and print out all 4 of those lines that I have in that file now. So we run that. I can see everything printing to the console because of the fact that we're using this while loop. Just step through every one of those lines of code, or those lines in the file. So whenever we're writing to a file, the printer class will automatically create the file if it does not already exist. But if we're trying to read from a file, but it doesn't exist, then an exception is going to be thrown. So because of that, it's going to be important to check if the file exists first. So what we can go ahead and do is we can create our file object, specifying the name or the path to that file, and then we can go ahead and use the exists method on that file to determine if it actually exists or not. So in this particular example, we're doing if the file does not exist. So we've got that exclamation point and then file.exists. So we're checking to see if it does not exist. We then go ahead and have a print statement. So if it does not exist, we'll just go ahead and say the file and then whatever file it is that we were looking for is not found. And then we've got this little exit code right here, similar to what we have to do for our dialog boxes when we're dealing with the JOption pane class, where basically we just want to safely exit this program. So we're just going to go ahead and use that exit code of 0 right there. So if we come back over to our program, we can actually see what I'm talking about. So let's say that I don't actually have this test file. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And so now if I try to run this, I'm trying to read from a file that doesn't exist, then what's going to happen is it's going to give me this long error right here, where basically it's trying to tell me that I have this file not found exception. So ideally I wanted to kind of close out or exit in a slightly cleaner way. So what I can go ahead and do is just before I use the scanner to start trying to read from it, I'm just going to go ahead and say if my file exists, but we're going to have the exclamation point at the beginning here. So we're just going to say if my file does not exist, then we can go ahead and just print that statement to the console. So we'll say system.out.println. We'll say the file test file.txt does not either does not exist or is not found. And then we'll go ahead and do system.exit and then give it the exit code of 0. Go ahead and save that. And so now if we run this, rather than getting this long kind of ugly exception message, it will instead just print this one line right here to the code or to the console, and then just go ahead and exit safely. So go ahead and run that, and now I'll just say the file test file.txt was not found. So this will provide you with a little bit of kind of validation for making sure that your files actually exist before you try to do something with them. Okay. So at this point, this is going to wrap up everything for this introduction to file input and output. We got to take a look at how to actually write to files using the print writer and file writer classes, and how to read from files using the file and scanner classes, and then also looked at a couple of different cases with our files. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and finish up on chapter 4 by taking a look at how to actually generate random numbers by making use out of the random class.